Wow. I mean, wow, right? You think the SEC media days are going to take over college football? It's big week, right, in college football, and then boom, all of a sudden, news drops mid SEC media days that Texas and Oklahoma, not just one but both, the kingpins of the Big 12, are seeking the opportunity to join the Southeastern Conference. And by the way, I just want to get this out of the way. This is not rumors. This is not smoke. There's legitimate fire here. When you hear powerful people like Greg Sankey hit you with the no comment, I'm gonna tell you right now, there's legitimate smoke here. Okay, there was a report today, first report by the Houston Chronicle, that both Texas and Oklahoma have reached out to the SEC with interest in turning the SEC into what we would assume is a 16-team conference. There is no, delineation as to whether or not the SEC will expand to 16, or whether or not they'll bump 2 teams out. I don't imagine this is we'll trade you Mizzou and Vandy for Texas and Oklahoma there, Big 12. I don't see that being the case, but holy smokes, this is huge. I mean, honestly, this is the biggest story in sports. And I know the Milwaukee Bucks won their first title in like 65 years since Lou Alcindor was there last night, and all that's fine and dandy. And Jimbo Fisher took the podium today, and all that good stuff's great in college football. This is the biggest story in sports, and here's why. Texas alone. I mean, Oklahoma is a dominant college football program. They've won 6 straight Big 12 titles. They're a really good football program, right? But Texas, and when I think of most powerful college football programs, first one that comes to mind is Texas. I think about Notre Dame too. Obviously think about Alabama because of the winning tradition that they've established over the last decade and a half, stretching on to 2 decades. But the amount of money and the amount of influence that Texas has on college football is unprecedented. Not necessarily unprecedented, but unmatched for sure in college football. And for them to just be trying to basically push their way into the sport's most powerful conference in the Southeastern Conference is out of this world. Honestly, I normally come into most of these live shows with some type of show notes, some type of script, some type of idea of what it is that I'm going to talk about. I thought about this one on my way to the house, basically. I was like, you know what? We got to get up out the office. We got to go talk about this right now. And I think of a couple things, right? First thing, it's about winners and losers, right? Obviously, I think the SEC, if this were to happen, is a massive winner. Okay, you get 2 bell cow programs in Texas and Oklahoma, one of which will be able to immediately compete. I think if you threw Oklahoma into the SEC right now, as much as there is an SEC bias from people like me, as much as I think it is the premier conference in college football, that's all fine and dandy. They will compete. They will 100% compete in this conference. They might get scored 45 on every single week because, it's a little bit different. The war of attrition is a little something these Big 12 teams, if they were going to hop in, is something I would be worried about if I was an Oklahoma or a Texas fan. But, I mean, you're talking about a boost in recruiting. You're talking about a boost in funding. And that's what this is all about, honestly. It's about, and I'm going to be scatterbrained during this because I'm juiced, if you can't tell. But no, this is all about money, right? I mean, if you just look at the TV rights, and I know the Longhorn Network has their own network going on, I would imagine that would be conflicting with it coming into the SEC if they get here or they get over into the SEC. But this is all about money. When you look at the TV revenue splits amongst the Power 5 conferences, most hover around 35 to 44 million, except for the SEC. The SEC, I think, handed out $60 million to its representative schools last year, and that's an even split. That's if you go winless, if you're Vanderbilt, or if you go undefeated, if you're Alabama. That is a revenue split down to the core. There is no doubt about it. There is value. There is monetary value in being in this conference in the SEC. So that's what this is about. But it's also about, turning what is the best conference in college football into a super conference. And I know a lot of people are sitting here thinking, well, this might not be as good for the rest of the members in the conference because it's now going to be harder to get into the college football playoff. Well, we know what's coming down the pike in 2023, right? I don't know if this will happen, A. I don't know when it will happen, B. But let's say it happens next year. There's reports that it could happen within the next couple of weeks, which blows my mind, honestly, that something could be just on the back burner. Something could just be not talked about for this long. And then the Houston Chronicle reports, and all of a sudden it might happen in the next couple of weeks, which was in the Houston Chronicle's report today. A, that blows my mind. B, even if it does happen, right? Even if they do get into this conference, I don't think, especially if you're like a Georgia fan, right? Or if you're an LSU fan, or, one of these premier programs in this conference that's not Alabama, you don't really have to worry about this anymore, honestly, because the 12-team playoff is coming. And if this happens, if Oklahoma and Texas get in, there's no doubt in my mind that you're going to get 3, most likely 4 members of your conference into that playoff, no matter what, year in, year out, because it's just that tough, right? Until something happens with Michigan State, until Michigan gets back on the right track, Ohio State dominates that conference, 100% dominates that conference, and it's a pretty weak conference. The Pac-12, you guys know this, the Pac-12 seems to be non-existent in terms of playoff conversations now, as it currently states. So, yeah, maybe USC gets back on the right track. Mario Cristobal is doing great things at Oregon, but as long as the remainder of the Power 5 conferences are on a downtick and you just added in 2 of the nation's most premier programs in Oklahoma and Texas, you're going to get 4 teams into a 12-team playoff. That's why they capped it at 4 teams. They capped it with the SEC in mind because they know just how competitive and how dominant that conference is year in and year out. So that's what I like. Georgia fans and all you other fans that are worried about that, don't be so worried because the new playoff expansion makes this okay. What you should know is that when Texas gets in here, if they get in here, when Oklahoma gets into the SEC, your revenue split's going to increase drastically. That $60 million that they hand out every single year is probably going to get tossed up, north of, I would honestly think $80 million. I think that is a reasonable number to aspire for if you're the SEC. And bottom line, it's like I said earlier, that's what this is about. This is about money. The only reason the SEC would take these 2 teams is because of money. They represent the main portion of the money that's in the Midwest, honestly. We can make a debate about whether or not the name needs to be changed from the Southeastern Conference just to the I don't know, something other than the Southeastern Conference, maybe the mega conference, maybe the rest of college football conference, doesn't matter conference. But no, this is huge. This is, like I said, the biggest story in college sports. And I think of a couple of losers here. Honestly, I told you that Oklahoma has won 6 of the last 6 Big 12 titles. They've won 12 out of the last 20. There is no doubt about it. Over the last 2 decades, Oklahoma has ran roughshod over the Big 12. And they want to give that up to come to the SEC. That's what they want to do. And I look at schools like Clemson, and I look at schools like Notre Dame, who remains independent because of their own TV money. But I really look at schools like Clemson. I really do. And I'm like, yeah. I mean, I don't doubt it that if Clemson reached out to the SEC, they probably could have been one of these teams a long time ago. They're going to remain in that ACC, and they're going to remain playing I don't mean to hate on the Georgia Techs and the Wake Forests of the world, and even Miami, right? Miami's back, right? Derek King, Miami's back. The ACC is boo-boo. They are not good from top to bottom, year in and year out. So for Clemson to just sit there and say, nah, we're good. We're just going to keep dominating. We're okay. Meanwhile, Oklahoma's like, nah, we want that SEC smoke. We want that SEC money, but we want that SEC smoke. And obviously another loser out of this has to be Texas A&M. The whole reason they got into this conference was to be able to recruit on a national level and even on an in-state level with a program like Texas. And since you've seen them get into the SEC, it also helps that Mac Brown's retired and Charlie Strong didn't quite do what he thought at Texas, and Tom Herman didn't quite amount to what people thought out there at Texas. It certainly helps that program's been down anyways. But Texas A&M getting into the SEC definitely hurt their recruiting, and they've probably seen that. That's a big loser for me in Texas A&M, and they're probably going to fight tooth and nail to keep this from happening. I'll never forget the first year Texas A&M got into the SEC, right? With Johnny Manziel, I think their first SEC game was against Florida out there in the 12th Man Stadium, or Kyle Allen Field, I believe it's called. It was an electric atmosphere, and I was like, yeah, this is definitely an SEC program. Texas fits that bill. Oklahoma certainly fits that bill. Now, the other losers are anybody that might potentially get kicked out, which it's way too early. First of all, it's too early to even say that this is going to happen. But it's not too early to say that this is awesome. This story is incredible. I think this is great for people like me that cover this conference. Honestly, I'm just going to be 100% honest with you. It's great for the film guy, no doubt about that. But it's also great for the rest of the national media. Now they can pretty much just focus on one conference. And yeah, maybe Oregon's good every once in a while. Maybe Ohio State's good every year. Maybe Clemson's great every year. But all of your time and attention is going to be spent on the SEC if this happens. And like I said, when you're getting no comment from guys like Greg Sankey, guys like big-time boosters and decision makers at Texas, big-time boosters and decision makers at Oklahoma, when they're telling you, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about, they know what you're talking about. I'm going to tell you that right now. And it's probably a lot of fire up underneath this smoke. So yeah, I don't know where else to go with this. I hopped on here to give you guys live reactions. And as you can see by my face, I'm stunned. I'm 100% stunned that this is going to happen or potentially happen. But I love it. Honestly, I think it's great for everybody involved in the Southeastern Conference. It might not be so great for Alabama because that SEC West is going to get tougher. I think the other conversation point you have to have is, what does the realignment look like if this happens within the Southeastern Conference? Which one of these schools gets pushed over into the East? Maybe you make Auburn move over, right? Maybe, I don't know what happens. Honestly, it's way too early to think about. But maybe you move Auburn over and force a year in, year out crossover game like Georgia has with Auburn now. You take that out of Auburn's schedule. You make them play Georgia anyways because now they're in the SEC East. And you make that year in, year out, that perennial crossover game be Alabama to keep the Iron Bowl intact, because I think that's the main reason we saw Missouri get shoved into the SEC East, because guys boosters were afraid that they were going to lose the Iron Bowl. Well, there's ways around that. And honestly, I think Greg Sankey, based off watching him this week and watching the way he's moved over the last 2 years, and honestly, the last 8 years since he's become the SEC commissioner, I don't think there's anybody in college football that can control this and handle it as well as he potentially will. I'll tell you that right now. I trust that guy with just about anything when it comes to the sport that I love in terms of college football. So if there's anyone that can make it happen and make it make sense, it's definitely going to be Greg Sankey. But no, I want you guys' thoughts and opinions. I want them in the comments here on YouTube. I want them in my mentions over on Twitter at Brooks Austin SI. I want them everywhere. This, like I said to start, is the biggest story in sports. Honestly, like I know MLB is in action right now. I know NFL is going to come around eventually and start playing football and get into OTAs and all that good stuff. I know the NBA season just wrapped up with a pretty decent finals series, but ain't nothing bigger than two of the biggest programs in the Big 12 jumping over here. Another winner off the top of my head before we close this, because I'm not going to be here long, it's got to be Iowa State, right? Oklahoma State, programs like that are on the rise, if you will. Matt Campbell doing a great job out there at Iowa State. But, yeah, they're licking their chops. They're like, oh, yeah, I mean, this is a walkthrough to the Big 12 championship. Maybe TCU starts to get some of those second tier and continues to get some of those second tier prospects out there in that Texas area. SMU comes to mind as well. Maybe they start getting some of these second-tier players like they already are. They have a great class this year, almost solely focused on the city of Dallas right there where they're from. So there's a lot of winners, but there's a lot of losers. There's going to be a lot of people ticked off, including the Big 12, or I would say Fox. Fox is probably pretty hot at this point right now. You're telling me two of my biggest drawers in terms of Texas and Oklahoma are trying to go get on ESPN platforms? You got to be kidding me. You have got to be kidding me. There's a lot to cover here, and we're going to cover it all over on dogsdaily.com. That, again, is dogsdaily.com, or just search si.com/college/Georgia. You will find everything up there. We've already got the first initial report, and we will have some reaction articles there as well with this video embedded. I appreciate you guys for being here. I'm in and out. I don't know how much I gave you other than a dude that's juiced up for college football. This is great. I don't think there's any doubt about that. This is good stuff if it ultimately happens. This means a lot more entertaining football games here in the Southeast on Saturdays. For the Film Guy Network, for Brooks Austin, I appreciate you for being here. We will see you next time.